Hello, my name is Rickard, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to recreate this graphic illustration effect in Photoshop. If you want to follow along, I have included a link in the description of this video with all the assets that you need, including some custom-made gradient maps. So go ahead, download those, and then let's dive into Photoshop. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go File, New. We're just going to create a new document here. And I want this to be 3000 pixels wide by 3000 pixels high, 72 resolution, RGB color mode, and square pixels. Let's hit create. Next, I want to set up some basic guides. So let's go to Guides, New Guide Layout. And here we're going to do 2 columns and get rid of the gutter. We're going to do 2 rows and get rid of the gutter. And then for the margin, we're going to do a top margin of 170, a left margin of 350, a bottom margin of 570, and then a right margin also 350. And this is kind of the box that our art is going to sit in, this inside box here. Okay, next we're going to do File, Place Embedded, and I'm going to grab this document here from Unsplash. This is the model that we're going to be using for our poster. And here I want to stretch this out so that it goes to the width of our container here. Kind of go toward the bottom as well. So something like this. All right, then I'm going to turn off the guides with Command semicolon and then go onto my lasso tool and just do a rough cutout of our woman. And I'm just doing this kind of holding down Option and then clicking. So I get almost like a scissor cutout, as if I were cutting this out with scissors. And we'll go ahead and add a mask here. And then I also want to just change her dress to something that looks a little more Hunger Games-ish, I guess you could say. So we'll just put in medieval dress bodice. And I think that looks good. So now I'm going to take both of these layers here and convert them into a smart object. Actually, before I even do that, I might just go ahead and add a black and white layer here, and then all these convert to a smart object. Okay, so this is kind of going to be the base of our illustration. Next thing I want to do is show you the basic technique we're going to use. And for that, I want to have a gradient because you'll better understand what we're doing with a gradient in place. So just making a selection kind of toward the bottom of my canvas here. It doesn't matter where it is. You just want a gradient across your image. So I'm going to go onto the gradient tool. And here I want to make sure I'm on gradient, not classic gradient. And then here I'm going to go to basic and just select the black to white gradient. And then I'm going to hold down Shift and just make a gradient that goes from one side to the other. Here, I want to make sure that the method for the gradient is on classic, not perceptual. That'll just make this more even in terms of our color distribution. Okay, so now this is kind of where the magic happens. So basically what I want to do is turn this more into a line art. And to do that, we need to separate this into only a few levels of brightness. And to do that, we're going to use the posterize adjustment layer, which is right here. And what this does is it stratifies your image into just a certain amount of levels. So here you can see 4 levels. And as you can see on our gradient, our entire spectrum of brightness and darkness is now reduced to just 4 levels of color. So 1, 2, 3, 4. If I increase this to 5, you'll see we now have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so it goes as I increase the number of levels. Obviously, if you increase this enough, you almost can't even see where the levels are because there's so many. But if we take this back down to, let's say, 5, we can see that we have 5 colors that we can now map our colors onto, or we have 5 levels that we can map our colors onto. And this is where the magic happens. So first, we need to determine where these colors are as far as brightness and darkness. So to do that, we can go onto our eyedropper tool, kind of select this area. And if we go to our eyedropper here, as I hover over it, you can see now I can change this here to HSB and then hover over it, and you'll see there the B. That's what I'm looking for. So this one is 0, this one is 25, this one is 50, this one is 75, and this one is 100. So those are the locations that I need to place my colors in order for them to map onto these locations. So let's go ahead and add a gradient map. And inside my gradient map, this color here is going to represent this, and then this color here is going to represent this block. So if I want to turn this into a red block, I'm going to do that. If I want to turn this into a green block, I would have to select the 25 mark, and then I could change this to a green block. If I want to change this to a blue block, I need to add another point at 50 and change that to blue. If I want to add another block here, let's say a yellow block, I would have to add a block at 75 and make that yellow. And there you can see how we can map colors onto the levels on the layer below. So here, if I go to my layers and change this to 6, well, now you can see our mapping is kind of broken because these spots no longer line up with how many spots there are here. So I would need one more spot. Now, if I add a spot, it's not going to be in the right place. I would need to first figure out where these are. Well, 100 divided by 6 or divided by 5, because realize there's 5 colors if you don't exclude the last one, we would be looking at every 20. So I would change the location of these to 20, 40, 60, and 80. And as soon as I do that, you can see that now all of our colors are actually lined up. So that's kind of the basics of how this posterize and gradient map work together to create this cool effect where you can map any color you want onto any of the layers below. So now that we know the basics of how it works, let's go here to this little gear icon and go to import gradients. And in the assets, I have these posterized gradients. Now, if we scroll down, you'll see that we have 5 color gradients, 6 color gradients, and 7 color gradients. And these all depend on how many layers you have here. So for our purposes, let's go ahead and change this to 7. And let's go to our gradient map and then scroll down to these that we just added and open up our 7 color gradients. So now if I click on this, you can see we can have these cool different color gradients, and they will sit on top of here and create the effect we want. So for our purposes and recreating our Hunger Games poster, I want to use this first gradient here, which goes from a red and then turns into a blue and then gets progressively lighter. So let's hit OK. Now, there's some things I need to do in order to make this look less photographic. Now, that is essentially what you're trying to do. You're trying to get rid of all the photographic details. So, for example, if I went to a Gaussian blur and did that, you would right away start to get a much more graphic look. However, you don't have a lot of control here, so this might not be your best tool. Now, you could also try some of the other blur tools. So, for example, I might try a surface blur. And a surface blur will get rid of the detail in my broad areas, but leave the detail in, for example, the eyes or where I might want higher detail. But to me, this is still a little too photographic, so let's cancel out of that. The one other one you might want to try is under noise, you could try the median blur. Now the median blur also does a blurring effect, but it's a little, if we just look at here, you can see it's not quite as strong as the Gaussian blur, and it does leave some of your edges alone. So I would say this is certainly improved, but also not the best outcome. So let's cancel out of that. So the other thing that we can use here, and you're going to find this under stylize, is the oil paint effect. Now with the oil paint effect, we just drag this to where her eye is. Basically, it's smudging everything, but it's smudging everything and trying as close as it can to stick to the contours of the existing image. So if we turn off the lighting, the scale and the bristles have no effect. So really we're just working with the stylization and the cleanliness, and we can kind of scoot these around. I could even turn on the preview to see what it looks like here to see what kind of effect we're getting. Now for me, I want a pretty strong effect here. If I look at just the stylization, that's how much it's going to be smudging it. And then let's look at just the cleanliness. So both of these have a very similar effect in terms of what they're doing to the image. But I think something around here, so like around 8 is good. I'm going to hit OK. But for all the areas that are not high detail, so not the eyes or not the lips, I actually want this effect to be much stronger. So what I can do is I can hold down Option and just make a copy of this, and then also hold down Option and just make a whole bunch of copies of this oil paint effect. And effectively what I'm doing is just continually smudging this. And I could even increase it to 10 and then make a couple more copies. And now you can see we have this very kind of cut out, illustrated look. And then if I put on a mask here and just use a black brush with a low flow, I can add the detail back into the areas where I want much higher detail. So that would be the eyes, maybe the bottom of the nose, and the lips here. Okay. And then the other thing I want to do here is in the eyes itself, I want to really punch up the eye highlight so that it almost goes to white. And also I want to make the teeth a little whiter. Now I can't really do that in here, so I'm going to double click and do it in here, meaning inside my smart object. So here what I can do is just make a lasso selection around the highlights in the eye. I'll do it on this eye as well. And then I'm also going to do a selection inside the teeth area here. And then I can just add a curve layer. Oops. And just bring this up so it's much brighter. And then I could also just with another brush, I kind of want to make this part and this part darker. So maybe I'll just use a normal brush with a black paintbrush. Just paint a little more black in here, a little more black right there. So something like that. All right, let's go ahead and close this and save. And you can see that looks a little better on the eyes there. Now the other thing I want to do here is below my posterize and my gradient, we can actually put these now in a group and we can call these illustration effect. Because if I turn this off, the illustration effect disappears. I don't need this gradient at the bottom anymore. And what I want to do is add another curve just between the illustration effect and my layers that make up the woman. And here I can adjust the curve, which will adjust where my levels are in my illustration effect. So you can see we have quite a bit of control there in terms of adjusting that illustration. So maybe we want it somewhere around there. And then the last thing we need to do here is just pull in the frame. And I want to make sure I pull in the frame under the illustration effect. So let's go File, Place Embedded. I'm going to grab this frame EPS and place it. Just make this the size of my document. And it didn't pull it under the illustration effect, so I'll just drag it down so it's under. This way, all the color that I have is just applying directly onto this new layer that I've added. And I am noticing that I'm not getting a pure red here, and I think that's because this is not a pure black and white. We can just adjust that here by doing a little curve on it, just like that. There you go. Okay, and then the last thing is to just apply a little bit of paper texture on top. So let's go to File, Place Embedded. I'm going to grab this Texture Lab paper 121. We'll put this on Multiply. Maybe take the opacity down to about 40%. I'm going to do File, Place Embedded again. Grab this paper 122. Let's give me some nice folds here. And anytime you're going to use one of the overlay blending modes, you want to make sure that your image is basically 50% gray. So right now this is over on the right of the histogram. You basically want all the information happening right in the middle of the histogram. So to adjust that, we're going to do Command M to bring up our curve. And here you can see in your histogram this stack of pixels. And we want this middle diagonal crossbar to cross right in the middle where my cursor is. So if we take the bottom of this, you can drag that so that the cursor is crossing right in the middle there. Now, when we put this on overlay, it's not going to be making our whole image lighter or darker. It's just going to be adding the texture. Now for this, I might actually want to use Vivid Light to have a stronger effect on top of my image. And then finally, we're going to do Place Embedded and grab this last one, 311. And this will add a few stronger folds on there. Again, same trick, Command M. And I want my diagonal line to cross right in the middle of this stack. So right about there, just drag this to there. Now, if you don't want it as contrasty, you can also drag this down. The important thing is that this crosses right in that middle spot. And then we can put this maybe on overlay or vivid light. I think I'll do vivid light and then just take this down to maybe about 70. And there you go. And now if you want to change this, all you have to do is go and change your smart object to a different photo, and that'll change this entire image. And then you also have here your curves, which you can always go in and change if you want more highlights or more shadows or more red or what have you. Also, you can go into the gradient map itself under your illustration effect. And if we go in here and look at these posterized gradients that we brought in, open up our 7 color and start flipping through these, you can see we can have other cool color effects with a single click, and then you can go in here and always revise it to whatever you want. The important thing is here, make sure you do not move the location of these dots because they are placed based on where these levels are putting the colors. So here, because we're using 7 levels, we want to make sure we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spots of color to go to. Now we could also go to our posterize effect, reduce this to 6 colors, and then here under our gradient, scroll down to our posterized gradients and use some of our 6 color gradients. So that's just a matter of how much detail you want in your illustration. You could obviously do more colors if you wanted to. Personally, I don't think anything above 7 colors is going to have this same kind of posterized effect. So I would stick between either 5 to 7 colors. Okay. So there you have it. That's how you recreate that effect in Photoshop. I will mention here that this was inspired in part by a tutorial created by Brady at Texture Labs. He shows you how to do this same thing by using a hard mix adjustment layer. You are limited to 4 colors, but you should check that out because he's also got some other great tips and tricks that you can use in doing this type of illustration if that's what you're interested in. All right, there you have it. If you enjoyed this, found some use from it, please subscribe to my channel, leave a like, leave a comment. I do really enjoy reading all your comments. I do try to respond to all of them. And also, if you want to learn more about Photoshop and Photoshop tools, check out Nucly.com. Here's some other tutorials to check out, and I will see you next week.